Hey everyone, how's it going? Yikes here. Today's video is going to be from one of the League of Legends wildrift game designers named NSEP. He usually goes over the patch notes on his Twitch channel after they go live on the servers, but on his recent stream he decided to start answering questions from the community, and he gave us really good answers about some of the questions that a lot of us have, such as when the new runes are coming out, when the new items, champions, how they're balanced, and more. So in this video, I will go over some of the key points from his stream where he went over these topics. Obviously, this video is not going to cover everything that was said on his live stream, which was 2 hours long. So please go ahead and check out the VOD in the description below if you're interested in watching the whole thing. And again, I feel like the community has been pretty heated over patch 3.0, and NSTEP really did a good job covering most of the things that the community was mad about. Therefore, I'm posting this video so it can reach a larger portion of the community and you guys can spread it around. Anyways, again, thanks for watching. Make sure to follow NSTEP and his social media to keep yourself updated and support him. And if you guys have any questions, make sure to leave it down below. Maybe he'll come around to this YouTube video and we'll start answering your questions. But yeah, again, make sure to follow him so you can catch his next stream, and maybe he's going to be able to answer your questions on his next stream and help you guys out. But yeah, let's get into the video and enjoy.
So since this is repeatedly being ignored, I'll put it simply: when are we getting more runes? When? I'm going to tell you straight up. Number one, it is difficult for us to add new runes for a bunch of different reasons. One of them is that literally the UI that we have access to currently restricts the number of runes that we can have in each slot. And so if we wanted to add significantly more runes, which would be the most efficient way to make runes is to make them in batches, we would need to completely redesign the UI, which would be an unbelievably massive project. So it's difficult for us to make new runes, particularly new keystones, because of the limitations of the current UI, and because our most efficient process for making runes would be in batches, which means we can't really make new runes in batches because we're restricted by the UI, and then, you can see how this is sort of a circular problem, right? So long term, theoretically, if we wanted to make a lot of new runes, maybe we might solve that problem. But basically, even though we know, like, one of the things players ask for a lot is new runes, and we're generally in the business of, trying to get players what they want, it's just not our highest priority. Like, we would love to add new runes. Like, there's been some discussions as to, like, hey, maybe we could fit X keystone in, in this patch, or in in the future, or 3 patches from now, or 10 patches from now, or whatever, right? It's like there's been lots of discussion around stuff like that. But the truth is just that we're spending our time on other things, and we think that our time is better spent doing champion balance and item reworks, because the runes in Wild Rift are pretty low power. And so while it certainly would be cool, and I personally would really like to work on runes, like there's some runes I would love to make or love to change. The truth is just that it's not as high of a priority for us, because we suspect that our efforts are like just better spent time wise on other things. We will make more runes in the future for sure, but I can't tell you that that's going to be soon, because the truth is, our time is just currently, we believe, better spent elsewhere. Doesn't necessarily mean we're not wrong. We could be wrong that, like, maybe runes are the best value for our time, but they're pretty expensive time-wise to make, not like monetarily. I mean, I guess time is literally money. We're working a job, but the reality here is that time-wise, runes are pretty expensive to make comparatively to the return we get on them, in terms of, like, yes, each player interacts with them each game, but especially the minor runes are really low power, and even in comparison to PC, the keystones are pretty low power, so it's hard for us to justify doing stuff here. So hopefully that answers that question. Wait, so there basically is a max number of runes? Yes, there is literally in the current UI a max number of runes. So we need to, like, again, I'm not saying we couldn't do this at some point, but we would have to redesign the UI to make significantly more runes. And then, because that's a lot of work, and then in combination, it's like more work for us to make runes in small batches in comparison to large batches, it's harder for us to justify doing them, right? So that's basically it. So runes are less impactful in Wild Rift than on PC? Yes. Runes are less impactful than Wild Rift comparatively to PC. And the same is actually true of items. In general, way more power is loaded in Wild Rift into champion level up. Okay, so let's see. All right, so let's start with the top question here. I understand basically all the balance changes. What I'm having trouble with is what is being left out of the balance changes. For example, Teemo, Soraka, and Jhin feel so weak right now, and Jace, Zed, Orianna feel so dominating. Can you speak to some of that, please? Okay, so first off, what I would say is like there's a difference between the reality and the feeling. And I'm not telling you, like, to be 100% clear about this, I am not telling you that your feelings are wrong because I understand, you feel what you feel, and I can't, I can't tell you what you feel. But there's a difference between the objective data metrics and how people feel. There is also room in between the two to, make changes and adjust things based on, primarily based on perception and not necessarily based on objective power. But what I can tell you right now is like champions like Jhin right now, like he might feel weak, and that might be a problem with the satisfaction of the champion or something about the champion. And I've talked about this a little bit before. I think my suspicion with Jhin in particular is that he actually falls off really hard in Wild Rift, which he does not in PC League. And in comparison, players may not appreciate the mid-game power that he has in Wild Rift, but they feel the loss of the late-game power more acutely than they do the like essentially the power is not distributed in ways that are satisfying or noticeable, and that makes him feel weak. We are I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen. We've been talking about maybe addressing Jin's power curve. I can't promise that we're definitely going to do that, but I can say that it is something we're aware of, in particular in Jin's case, that it's not actually that the champion is weak. He might feel weak, but the reality is that actually his power curve is off, and he's absolutely terrible late game, and that is more what we're interested in addressing here. So that's something we've been talking about. Again, not necessarily something we're going to do right now, but something we're discussing. For Soraka and Teemo, I can't necessarily speak as much to them because I haven't spent as much time reviewing the data. I can tell you that Teemo actually is another champion that has a very different power curve in Wild Rift comparatively to PC. In Wild Rift, his power curve is basically flat. In PC, his power curve is actually immensely scaling. Teemo's late game win rate is actually one of the best in PC League of Legends on basically every patch. So my suspicion is that the reason these champions feel weak is probably not. I mean, I know it's not because they're actually weak, because I know statistically they're actually fine. It is probably because there are mismatches with player perception that we should probably be looking to round out. The reason why we can't just do those, though, is because that requires a lot of investigation and a lot of work. So to sort of address this secondary question of like, why are we not addressing champions that feel weak? The truth is that they're not actually weak. We understand they may feel weak, but we can't immediately address that because that takes a lot of work, and it's quite difficult work, to be honest with you. So that's a challenge. So more to speak to the first part, or sorry, I'm super mixed up on this question. So Jay said Zed, Orianna. These are kind of reverse, right? It's like they feel more powerful than they are. And Zed, to be fair, I think, like from what I recall, I think Zed's actually pretty powerful and like close to someone we could nerf. I know we've nerfed him a couple times already. We could probably nerf him. But like most of these champions are champions that we probably could nerf. Like Zed and Orianna, we certainly could nerf. Jace is like actually not performing super well for most players, so it would be tough for us to nerf him. Though again, not impossible, especially if we can find something that is like particularly skill skewed to nerf, so that it doesn't harm the like lesser skilled Jace players. Most of it is going to be that there's just a like basically the answer to sum up the answer to this question is like we can't necessarily just nerf based on player perception because that doesn't actually match reality. And we can't just immediately address every player concern because a lot of these things will take longer term work to do. And I can tell you for sure, like Soraka and Jhin, we've actually talked about quite a bit on my team recently about like maybe we should like about doing work on them to address their power curves or their satisfaction. Teemo's one we probably should look into as well because I've seen the sentiment that Teemo is really weak frequently, even though the reality is that data wise he's fine. So hopefully that answers the question. Have you considered to nerf champions with high ban rate? Yes, we actually do that if they reach a certain threshold. Yes, that is something that we do. Jace could just be the damage he does with QE. Well, QE is pretty. It's not like it's crazy hard to land. How's Evelynn been looking these past few months? I know she hasn't been touched in a long time. I think we'd like to do something with Evelynn to make her a little bit less super skill skewed, more so than she currently is. Like currently, she's kind of in a state that some other champions are in, where she's good for very highly skilled players, but not good for most players. And when I say highly skilled players, I don't mean players that have put a bunch of games on Evelyn. I mean players who are literally playing in high MMR lobbies is like where Evelyn is good. Okay, so do you think the Wild Rift dev team feels they/you can't keep up with what the community wants, or do you think the community is asking for just more than can be done? I don't know. I feel like it's a combination of factors, right? It's like part of the problem is that because we're a mobile game, if you compare to PC, right, which is what a lot of people do, they'll say things like, "Look, PC did this thing, 2 patches after they said they would, or whatever, right? Or like 2 weeks later, they got this thing when they were talking about it." It's like like Wild Rift is a mobile game, and mobile games have very different game dev processes, like where you can't just put something into the next patch very easily, right? You have to cut the patches, you have to give the content patches to Apple and Google and say like, look, we want to put this content on your app store. Can you please let us do that? So we work significantly in the past. We work in the past, right? You have to think of it as like if the League of Legends dev team works like 2 weeks or like 4 weeks in the past, depending on what context you're talking about, we work significantly further than that in the past. So it's very hard for us to anticipate what players want, and that's why we end up with a lot of changes in the patch notes where people are like, "Hey, what's the deal with this?" And to be clear, not every single change that we make is that far in the past. But as far as like content goes, we can't just be like, "Oh, let's just make this item and ship it in a month." It's like items take us a really long time to make. Runes take us a really long time to make because content patches are so big and we have to plan for them so far ahead of time. So part of it is like players are asking us for new content, and it's like, well, it's really hard for us to make new content and it takes us a long time. So part of it is like kind of a mismatch between like what our physical limits are and also and the like the development of the game, right? It's like it's not that we don't have enough people to do this stuff, right? It's like, we have enough people to make the stuff that we want to make. It just appears slow because everything is really delayed and things get moved in and out of content patches a lot. And there's just like a lot of difficulties in doing this stuff. Also, you have to keep in mind that the Wild Rift dev team is just not as optimized as PC, right? PC has had, 12 years or whatever to get used to, shipping content as fast as possible at maximum speed all the time. Wild Rift just isn't as experienced of a team at just shipping lots of content really quickly. And so in terms of like people asking for more content, it's not necessarily that we don't have the capacity to make it. It's that we don't necessarily have the experience and the knowledge to like make it and ship it as fast as we want to. And there's just a lot of things that go on behind there. And there's just a lot of things that we can learn and get better at over time. And we'll get better. So that's stuff that we're all working on. Okay. How big is the Wild Rift team? It depends. My team itself is pretty small, the Systems and Balance team. The big Wild Rift team is, I think, quite large. I don't know the exact numbers, though. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't really know the exact numbers of a lot of things. My team, I guess it depends on which team, like whether it's like talking about the S&B subgroup or like the in-game team. There's like a lot of different numbers. Basically, depending on how you're cutting it, my team, you could say my team is anywhere from like 5 people to like 15 people or something like that. But it depends on like how you're saying like which team and like which subgroups and all this other sort of stuff. So it's tough. Actually, I think it could be more than 15 depending on how you slice it. I think it could be higher than like 20 or even maybe 30. I'm not actually entirely sure. It also depends on allocation. So I don't know. It's a complicated question and I don't really have a good answer for you, honestly. Unfortunately. Anyway, to go back to this question, it's an unfortunate set of circumstances because it's like we certainly can't keep up with what some parts of the community want, right? Like some people ask us for just way more stuff than we could possibly make, right? It's like that's going to be the case no matter what, though, right? With any game, people are always going to be asking for more, and that's fine, right? It's not necessarily saying that that the people are wrong to ask for more. It's like that basically means they want to play your game more, right? That's fine. But it's also a question of just like what can you physically do and like what can the average player actually keep up with? Because obviously the players who are the most invested and play the most are going to want the most new content, but that's not necessarily what's good for 99% of the players. And so we have to strike a balance here between like how much new content can we realistically add, how much can we actually make, how much is actually good for the players, et cetera, right? There's like a lot of things to consider. And so I don't know. It's more a combination of like I think there's improvement to be done on both sides, to be honest, is how I would put it. Okay. Why was this patch called 3.0? People think it's a huge patch and a lot of disappointment. I kind of agree with this line of reasoning, by the way. Like, to be clear, this question I think is totally fair. Basically, our patch systems naming conventions are like there are certain rules to them, right? It's like it's a new year, therefore it's the next number, right? It's the next whole number. It's 3.0. However, our patch process doesn't necessarily line up with the way that this is the naming convention is, right? It's like the naming convention says this is a content patch and it's the first one of the year. Therefore, it's whatever the last, whatever the number was last year plus one, and then we chop off the decimal, right? It's like it's 3.0 because this is the first content patch of the year. Um, I kind of agree with this reasoning though, with the logic here of like, this wasn't really a big patch from a balance standpoint, and so for some players this is kind of disappointing. To be clear though, there is a lot of non-balance patch content in here, and so from the perspective of Wild Rift as a whole, it's still a pretty big patch. It's just that there's not a ton of balance stuff in it, which has there's a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is the winter break, making it more difficult to get stuff into the patch. Um, among other things, which I won't go into, there's a lot of stuff a lot of reasons why this is a smaller patch balance wise. But yeah, I kind of agree. This is something I want to talk about internally of like, should we continue to use this patch naming convention? Because this obviously got some pretty big mix ups for players, whereas like, hey, here's our 3.0 patch, and it does have a lot of content in it, but for some players, it was not necessarily the content they were expecting, and so that's kind of a weird like mismatch of player expectations. And that's not to blame the comms people, right? This is not their fault. It's just that there's kind of like a mismatch of expectations, and maybe we should have done some better communication. Like maybe we should have been more specific before we released the patch of like, look, to be clear, due to a combination of factors, including our winter break, we can't get a ton of balance work into this patch, and therefore, that we could have managed expectations better. So there's probably a lot of things that could have been done differently, and something to improve on in the future for sure. So let's see, blah blah blah. Will we never get an API for Wildrift because they're being used for balance? So the fact that we're using data for balance has basically nothing to do with the API. The API is a whole other discussion, which is not on. It's not really related to me. It's like personally, I don't really mind one way or the other, but essentially it has been decided that that is not, at least currently, something we're going to offer to players. I don't really know much about like the context behind the decision or why. I could say that currently that's not something we're doing, and that's really all I can say about it. I honestly just don't really know too much from the top here. Will the team be more transparent on the patch notes as to what levels of play there are for balancing, like on PC, average, skilled, elite, pro? How closely does pro play influence balance? So these are two separate questions. So for the first one, part of the problem is that um, when the PC patch notes use, hey, this is for average, skilled, elite, pro, they have official definitions of these things, and then the API is public, so people can actually reference that data. And the public data available isn't perfect for PC League, but it's pretty good, and it gives you a good estimation of like, hey, I know that this is the average win rate of the champion, and it's like very clear. It's like, okay, we can see this data. This must be, and so they could tell you like, look, we're doing it because of this data, which you can see. Since players can't see our data in Wild Rift, it's kind of a different it's a different story. And so personally, I would like to do this. Like I have said we could. I have argued that we should do something like this, but basically the counter argument, which I think is very reasonable, is, well, the players can't see the data, and so it doesn't really mean anything to players if we tell them, look, this champion is weak in average and therefore they're being buffed, or this champion is OP in skilled and therefore they need to be nerfed or whatever, right? Um, Basically the summary of like, will we be more transparent is like, it's something I've argued for. I think the counter argument though is very solid, that like it's very hard for players to gain any meaningful information out of this for Wild Rift because the API is not public. So that's kind of tough. For the second question, how closely does pro play influence balance? It depends. We did do some specific changes for pro play before Horizon Cup because we decided that would be like the most opportune time. Like, hey, look, this is a time when we can give the pro players some stuff, and it can be good for the average player too, because these are like changes that we want to do. Like some of these changes are things that we wanted to do anyway, and so we like kind of prioritize differently. But overall, we don't have an official framework of like, we must balance around pro or anything like that. But generally speaking, if something is dominating pro, we will generally be taking a look at them. And It's something that we should probably formalize. Like we should probably write up a framework for how we deal with pro exactly, because we don't currently have one. We've been kind of doing it on the fly as we go here. But currently we don't have a formalized agreement about this. We just generally watch pro and get data, and we look at things and we're like, hey, if that's a really high percentage presence in pro, we'll nerf it or whatever. But how closely is like kind of hard to answer because it's sort of nebulous because we don't have an exact framework for how we're supposed to deal with pro.